What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 6 sleeper picks.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to give you some of my top DFS sleeper picks, super low priced and low ownership players that could crush value this week and give your lineup an advantage over the field. These are risky plays, meant for large tournaments only. Don't go all in on any of these guys. They are high risk, high reward picks. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Oh, and good news, guys. Make sure to stay tuned to the very end of this video because we removed the box that was popping up and blocking the lineup. So now you can see a full lineup using these picks that we made in this video if you stay to the very end. Okay, guys, NFL Week 6. Let's take a look at the quarterback position. So it was pretty hard to find a sleeper pick at the quarterback position, but a couple of stud quarterbacks that I think their ownership is way too low. Take a look at Kyler Murray from the Arizona Cardinals playing the Cleveland Browns, who have the fourth worst defense versus quarterbacks, or they give up the fourth most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And Kyler Murray has averaged 26.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6 rush attempts per game. He's only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 22.1 fantasy points here in Week 6. He's $7,900 DraftKings salary and $500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game, with the Cardinals trailing by 3.5. Now, he had a bad game last week, only scored 14 fantasy points, but he scored 23, 23, 38, and 35 fantasy points in the first 4 weeks of the season. Now he's got a good matchup here versus the Cleveland Browns, who have a bad passing defense, and he's only going to be about 2% owned. So I think that ownership is way too low, but the reason is because Patrick Mahomes is only $400 more in a smash spot versus the Washington football team. So most people are just going to spend the extra money on Patrick Mahomes, and that's why Mahomes is sucking up all the ownership here. But if you want to make your lineup different and go with a stud sleeper pick here, take a look at Kyler Murray here versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, the other quarterback that I think their ownership is way too low is Justin Herbert from the LA Chargers playing the Baltimore Ravens, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Justin Herbert has averaged 27.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3.8 rush attempts per game. He's only going to be about 3% owned, projected at 22.2 fantasy points here in Week 6. He's $7,300 DraftKings salary and $700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, with the Chargers trailing by 2.5. So you got a high-scoring game, a decent matchup. You got a suspect Baltimore defense who's been letting up a ton of points. Justin Herbert scored 46 fantasy points last week. He's been a monster throughout the season. So I like Justin Herbert here versus the Baltimore Ravens. Okay, now if you want a deep sleeper pick, and this is a high-risk, high-reward pick if you want to save some salary, I probably won't play him too much, but he does have a great matchup and he could give you upside here. Take a look at Mac Jones from the New England Patriots playing the Dallas Cowboys, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Mac Jones, he's only averaged 13.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 1.6 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 2% owned, projected at 16.1 fantasy points here in Week 6. But he's only $5,200 DraftKings salary 1,300 more on FanDuel, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Patriots trailing by 3.5. So it's a high-scoring game. He's got a great matchup here, and this should be a passing game script as the Patriots play from behind, and Dak keeps the pressure on Mac Jones to keep throwing the ball. So this could be an interesting, deep sleeper pick, high risk, high reward. So I like Mac Jones here versus the Dallas Cowboys.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. It was also hard to find a sleeper pick at the running back position, but I found somebody for you. I like Josh Jacobs from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the Denver Broncos, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing running backs, but Josh Jacobs has averaged 14.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 12.7 rush attempts per game and 4 pass targets per game. He's only going to be about 3% owned, projected at 12.3 fantasy points here in week 6, and he's $5,900 DraftKings salary, 900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43.5 points scored in this game, with the Raiders trailing by 4. So it was hard to find a sleeper pick at the running back position. Josh Jacobs looked to be the best I could do for you guys. There could be some other guys that have some opportunity, like you got James Conner. He's going to be super low owned. He's been playing pretty well the past 3 weeks, scoring double-digit fantasy points, getting double-digit rush attempts, but he's also pretty risky because he shares the ball a lot. So when you're looking at a guy, you're going to have a number 1 running back, some guy that's got a pretty big ceiling. He scored 17 fantasy points last week off of 15 rush attempts and 5 pass targets. So you got a guy that could get 20 plus touches in this game at only 3% ownership, and his salary is pretty low. So I like Josh Jacobs here versus the Denver Broncos. Okay, a bunch of sleeper picks at the wide receiver position. Got a bunch of good picks for you guys here. So let's get into this. We got my favorite sleeper pick on the slate. He's super low salary. He's going to be super low owned. Take a look at DeAndre Carter from the Washington football team playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have the worst defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. DeAndre Carter, he scored 11 fantasy points last week off of 8 pass targets. He even got a rush attempt. Now, he's only averaging 4.2 fantasy points per game on the season, but it looks like he's only played a couple of weeks. Yes, and he scored 9 and 11 fantasy points in those 2 games. So he's not even going to be 1% owned, and he's only 3,000 DraftKings salary, 1,800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 54.5 points scored in this game, with the Washington football team trailing by 7. So you got a super high scoring game, a great matchup, and a passing game script. If he can get 5 to 8 targets in this game for only 3,000 DraftKings salary, that's a ton of opportunity, super low ownership. So I like DeAndre Carter here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay, the other sleeper pick that I like is Odell Beckham Jr. from the Cleveland Browns playing the Arizona Cardinals, who have a good defense overall, but they give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Odell Beckham Jr., he's only averaged 7.6 fantasy points per game on the season, but he's getting an average of 6.3 pass targets per game, and he's on the field for 82% of the snaps. he's only going to be about 1% owned, projected at 12.6 fantasy points here in week 6, and he's only 5,100 DraftKings salary, 900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game, with the Cleveland Browns favored by 3.5. So pretty good matchup here. Close, competitive game. We know Odell Beckham Jr. has a huge ceiling. He could put up a monster game here. He's been getting the pass targets, just hasn't been super productive, but I think this could be a breakout game. So I like Odell Beckham Jr. here versus the Arizona Cardinals.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, another sleeper pick is Adam Thielen from the Minnesota Vikings playing the Carolina Panthers, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing wide receivers. Adam Thielen, he's averaged 15.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.4 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 96% of the snaps. He's only going to be about 1% owned, projected at 13.9 fantasy points here in week 6. He's 5,800 DraftKings salary and 1,400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45 points scored in this game, with the Vikings favored by 2.5. So I know it's a tough matchup here, but I just think that price tag is a little bit low. I think that ownership is a little bit low for a guy that's on the field for 96% of the snaps, getting an average of 7.4 pass targets per game. Now, he hasn't played well the past couple of weeks, only scoring 6 and 8 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. But his first 3 games of the season, he scored 17, 16, and 30 fantasy points. So he's got monster upside. I think he's going to surprise some people here in week 6. So I like Adam Thielen here versus the Carolina Panthers. Okay, now a sleeper pick on the other side of the ball. I like Robbie Anderson from the Carolina Panthers playing the Minnesota Vikings, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing wide receivers. Now, Robbie Anderson, he's only averaged 7.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.8 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 78% of the snaps. He's going to be about 1% owned, projected at 10.5 fantasy points here in week 6. He's 4,800 DraftKings salary, 700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45 points scored in this game, with the Panthers trailing by 2.5. So the reason that I like this pick is because he got 7 and 11 pass targets the last 2 games. Now, he didn't turn that into much, only 5 and 10 fantasy points, and it does look like Christian McCaffrey's going to be back, and maybe that's why his ownership has dropped down here. But he's still on the field for 78% of the snaps, still should get between 6 to 8 pass targets, and his salary's pretty low, and I think he's got some pretty big upside if he gets going. So I like Robbie Anderson here versus the Minnesota Vikings. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. So I like Noah Fant, who's going to only be about 4% owned. Tyler Higbee is okay at 2%. Hunter Henry, I love that play here this week. He's going to be about 5% owned. But if you're looking for a deep sleeper pick here at the tight end position, take a look at Donald Parham Jr. from the LA Chargers playing the Baltimore Ravens, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Donald Parham Jr., he's averaged 5.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 1.4 pass targets per game. But take a look at his last 2 games. He scored 13 and 10 fantasy points off of 2 and 3 pass targets. Now, he's only projected at 4.5 fantasy points here in week 6, but he's only $2,900 DraftKings salary, $2,000 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, and the Chargers trailing by 2.5. So this is a great tight end matchup here, and I like that he got 2 and 3 pass targets the last 2 games, scoring double-digit fantasy points in each of those games. But this is a deep sleeper pick, just one of those guys you may want to just sprinkle in there into 1 or 2 lineups at the most, just to make your lineup totally different, save a ton of salary at the tight end position, hope that he scores a touchdown, then that's going to give your lineup a pretty big advantage here. So I like Donald Parham Jr. as a high-risk, high-reward play here versus the Baltimore Ravens.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.